thank you for tuning into this week's episode of Soulful Wahine. Today's episode is going to be a little personal, a little confrontational, and honestly, it might feel a little painful. And you might even feel like I'm calling you out. I say all of these things because in today's episode, we're going to be talking about trauma bonds. Okay? And I want to say something with love and grace. You're not in love. You're trauma bonded. I'm going to say that again. You're not in love. You're trauma bonded. And I'm saying all of this, folks, because I need you guys to understand something. Just because you feel strongly about someone, just because it's hard to let them go, just because the connection feels intense, that does not mean that it's love. And I feel that it is so important for us while we're on this journey to have an accurate definition of what trauma bonds look like, and one, how we can find ourselves in them, and two, how we can begin to differentiate between trauma bonds and real love. Because for those of us who have experienced trauma bonds, when we get out of them, it can feel scary to even think or entertain the idea of love or really putting ourselves back out there. And so, as always, while we move through this episode, folks, please move through it with grace, compassion, and kindness for yourself. That's all I ask. Before we get into this, folks, I want to be very clear about something. This conversation is not just about calling someone toxic and then moving on and ending the conversation. No. Today's conversation, again, is kind of a piggyback off of last week's conversation, in the sense of getting to understand the pattern underneath the connection. Okay? Like I mentioned, I am a person of patterns. Personally, I love patterns because, again, patterns kind of help us not only understand ourselves, but they also understand our dynamics and the people around us. And so today's conversation is about understanding the pattern underneath the connections that we find ourselves in. Because if we don't understand the pattern, we will keep finding ourselves in the same exact dynamic, just with different people. And the thing is, folks, a lot of us don't realize this, but if we do not change that pattern, it will continue to keep feeling just as intense every single time. One thing that I see a lot in my work is people tend to confuse intensity for connection, inconsistency for passion, and emotional highs and lows for deep love. And the thing is I understand why these things happen. When something feels strong, consuming, and hard to walk away from, your brain automatically labels it as meaningful. And the thing is, folks, is strong doesn't always mean healthy, and hard to leave doesn't always mean that it's meant for you. Does that make sense? And so instead of just throwing labels around, let's actually slow this down and break apart what's really happening. Okay, so that again, you guys can get a full understanding of what's taking place. Because once you understand the difference between the two, you can start to see your patterns more clearly. I now want to just take some time to go ahead and formally define what a trauma bond is. And for those listening, this is my understanding. This is the way that I define trauma bonds. And so trauma bonds are not just inconsistency or toxic dynamics. Trauma bonds are an attachment that forms when a relationship repeatedly activates your nervous system and brings up things such as anxiety, fear of losing them, or emotional distress. And at the same time, that same relationship also becomes your way of calming or regulating those exact feelings. And so over time, what starts to happen is the relationship creates emotional instability. Your body tends to go into a state of activation. So again, those feelings of stress, hyperfocus, anxiety come up. And then when things start to feel good again, your body calms down. And what happens during all of this is your brain begins to start linking the person that dysregulates me is also the same person that regulates me. And so, right there, that's the bond that's created. Let's walk through this in a way that highlights the trauma piece. Okay? So, let's say that you meet someone and things feel pretty good. Things feel honestly really good in the beginning. You know, they're consistent, they're attentive, you feel safe, you feel chosen, and you feel seen. But then somewhere along the lines, something shifts. They start to pull back. Their communication becomes minimal, and you begin to feel anxious, unsettled, and start to kind of question, where did things start to change? And the thing is it's not just a casual thought either, okay? Because you might notice other things, such as your mood changes. You feel on edge. You keep checking your phone to see if they've reached out. And you're thinking about it throughout the day. Even if you're trying to keep yourself busy, you still find yourself having those thoughts kind of creeping up. And I want to point out, folks, that that right there is your nervous system being activated. Now let's pause, because shortly they come back. They text you. They give you attention again. Maybe they apologize. Or maybe they just kind of return and act like nothing happened. You know, act like everything is just normal. And your body feels immediate relief. You feel calmer, more settled, more connected again. And then it repeats. And each time it repeats, your attachment to this person gets stronger. It's not because the relationship is healthy, but it's because the cycle keeps reinforcing itself. And this is the part that matters, folks. Your body, again, just learned that this person is the reason that I feel anxious, but this person is also the reason why I feel okay again. And the thing is now our systems start to attach to them. Not because we like them, but because our body is using them to regulate itself. Does that make sense? I quickly want to touch on why this dynamic can feel a lot stronger for some people than others. And I just want to say, folks, that if you have a history of inconsistency in relationships, emotional neglect, having to earn love or attention, or not knowing what to expect from the people that you were growing up around, your nervous system already learned that closeness isn't always consistent. Connection can come and go. You have to stay emotionally alert to maintain it. And when we experience this kind of push-pull dynamics, as an adult, it doesn't just feel stressful, but it can also feel familiar. And like I always say, folks, just because something is familiar, that does not mean that it's healthy. That does not mean that it's safe. It just means that our system recognizes it. And instead of just liking the person, we're also now responding to a pattern that our body already understands. Part of the reason why it can feel so hard to detach is because it's not just about them. It's about what your system has been conditioned to respond to. Okay? This is an area where people can get confused, because if this dynamic, if this dynamic is built on inconsistency and emotional distress, why does it feel so strong? Why does it feel so hard to walk away from? Why does this feel like love? Feels like love, folks, because when they come back, when they're being kind, attentive, and affectionate, it feels like, whoa, see, this is who they really are. But what's actually happening and what you're experiencing is relief after emotional distress. And your brain starts to associate that relief with connection. So now you're not just attached to the person, you're attached to the feeling of things being okay again. As I mentioned, folks, move through this conversation at your own pace. Move through it with kindness, grace, and compassion. Because I'll tell you right now, as I was doing these slides, there was definitely some stuff that came up for me. And so, if anything is coming up for you, make sure that you're taking care of yourself, okay? I now want to touch on the addiction piece because this is a piece that me personally, I don't really hear a lot of folks touch on when it comes to trauma bonds. And I want to throw out there, folks, that even with how chaotic things can feel or how chaotic things can actually be, this dynamic can still feel addictive. And the reason for that is because our brain is constantly trying to get back to the good part. Okay? So you might notice yourself checking your phone constantly, overanalyzing messages or tone, feeling a rush when they give you attention again, or struggling to detach even when you know that it's not working. That's not random, okay? That's your brain getting used to unpredictable rewards. Now, folks, I want to layer something on top of this that can explain a lot of the emotional chaos, and that is something that is called the drama triangle. This is a pattern that people can fall into in unstable relationships, and it has three roles: the victim, the rescuer, and the persecutor. What a lot of people don't realize when it comes to the drama triangle is roles can be switched, meaning that people do not just stay in one role. Nope. They rotate between all three depending on what's going on. I want to quickly break down the drama triangle and what it can actually look like or sound like. With the victim, we typically hear things such as, I don't understand why they're treating me like this, or I'm trying so hard and it's not enough. With the rescuer, we typically hear things like, I can help them change, or if I just love them better, this will work. And lastly, the persecutor. We typically hear things such as, you're the problem, or this is all your fault. With the persecutor role, this can be them towards you, or it could also be you reacting after feeling overwhelmed. How the drama triangle keeps us stuck is this cycle keeps us emotionally invested because when you're the rescuer, you feel responsible for fixing things. When you're the victim, you feel hurt, but still attached to that person. And when things escalate, someone becomes the persecutor. So instead of resolution, we get constant role switching. Now, I want to connect this to a pattern that you've probably heard of before, and that is the cycle of abuse. While I'm going over this, I want you to listen closely because this isn't just a list of stages. This cycle is one of the main ways that trauma bonds get reinforced over time. Okay? So, in the first phase, we have the tension building. So, something feels off, communication shifts, energy changes. You feel like you have to be careful or aware, kind of like walking on eggshells. Your body starts to feel anxious, on edge, or even hyper aware of your person's behavior. Phase two is the incident. This is the moment where harm happens, okay? Conflict, shutdown, disrespect, emotional or physical hurt takes place in this stage. Something that creates real emotional distress. And typically, this is where our systems spike. This is where the trauma activation happens. Stage three is the reconnection or the honeymoon phase. So this is when they come back. This is where we see things such as apologies, affection, attention, temporary changes in behavior. And our body starts to feel calm again, relief. We can even feel closeness to our person again. Stage 4 is calm or temporary stability. Things feel okay for a little while, but nothing has actually shifted underneath the surface. And so eventually, the tension starts to build again. And I want you folks to notice something. This cycle is doing two things at the same time. It's creating emotional distress, and then it's relieving that distress. So your system, again, begins to learn this person is where I go when I feel bad, even if they're also the reason I feel bad. And again, folks, that is exactly how trauma bonds form. I also want to touch on a really important part of the abuse cycle, and that's the most powerful part. The most powerful part of this entire cycle is the honeymoon phase, because this is where everything feels better, more connected, more hopeful. And this is where we start thinking things such as, well, this is the real version of them. This is what the relationship could be like. And maybe it's actually getting better. But what's actually happening, folks, is again, our nervous system is coming down from that distress. We're beginning to feel relief. And our brain is reading that relief as connection. And so it doesn't just feel good, it feels meaningful. And that's what keeps people attached. Not the full pattern, but these moments in between, these moments, during the honeymoon phase where things feel good, things feel connected, things feel harmonious. And so now the question, folks, becomes, if this is what keeps pulling you back in, then what does real love actually look like when it's not built on this kind of cycle? If you have been here for a while, you have heard me say multiple times that real love is built on consistency and not intensity. So what that looks like is communication does not disappear when things get hard. Effort stays relatively steady. Conflict gets addressed, not avoided or escalated. And you're not constantly trying to figure out where you stand with this person. And again, it's about patterns, not just the little moments. Emotionally, it feels different. We begin to feel more stable and more grounded than anxious. Things feel less consuming, but more secure. And we're not constantly waiting for that shift to happen. We're not constantly waiting for the shoe to drop. I also want to throw this out, folks. It might not feel as intense, but it feels more reliable. And this is where people hesitate because they start to realize, if this isn't love, then what have I been experiencing? And so before we move forward here, just sit with that for a second. Okay? I'm going to be direct for a second, but I'm also going to hold your hand while doing it, folks. If you are constantly overthinking their behavior, waiting for consistency, trying to get back to how things used to feel, or questioning where you stand, that's not a stable connection. That's a cycle that you are trying to make sense of. Where I feel like most people get things twisted or mixed up is the fact that most people don't miss the relationship as a whole. They miss specific moments within it. So what they're actually feeling is they're missing the good version of the person. They're missing how it felt when things were okay. They're missing the potential, not the pattern. And that's what keeps them emotionally tied. But like I keep saying, folks, we have to look at patterns and not moments. I want to throw out there that just because you miss someone, just because you feel attached, just because it feels hard to let go, that doesn't automatically mean that the relationship was working. You can feel a strong emotional pull towards someone and still not have a relationship that is stable, consistent, or even meeting your needs. I also want to touch on attachment versus compatibility, because you can be deeply attached to someone who is not compatible with you. And attachment just means that there's a bond. Compatibility means that your needs are met consistently, communication works, and there's stability present. You can have one without the other. Over time, trauma bonds change what we tolerate, folks. So you might start to minimize behaviors that used to bother you. You might begin to question your own reactions, or you might even begin to accept inconsistency as normal. And this isn't because you lowered your standards intentionally, but because you adapted to what you were given. That's all. You can know that something isn't working and still feel pulled to stay, folks. Because again, this is not just emotional, it is patterned. Your brain and body are used to the cycle, the relief, and the reconnection. So even with clarity, even with all of this information, there can still be an attachment. And my thing is even if there is an attachment, still give grace to yourself. Because unlearning these things, unlearning things that our nervous system is used to, it takes time. What does real change actually look like? Real change is not apologies, temporary effort, or short-lived improvement. Real change, folks, is consistent behavior over time. Different actions in the same situations. Accountability without defensiveness. An effort that doesn't disappear after conflict. If that pattern has not changed, the relationship has not changed. And I quickly want to say something. A lot of people stay because of potential. Not what the relationship is, but what it could be. But potential is inconsistent, and relationships are built on what is consistent. The longer you stay in these trauma bonds, folks, the more it will impact how you see yourself. You might start to doubt your needs. You might start to feel like you're too much. You might start becoming more anxious or reactive. And you might start losing clarity about what you actually want. And now it's not just about the relationship, it's about what it's doing to you. And so instead of focusing on how strong it feels, how good it can be, what it could become, start focusing on patterns over time, consistency over behavior, how conflict is handled, and how you consistently feel. Patterns will always tell you more than moments. Always. If you're recognizing this pattern, or if anything resonated today, folks, the goal isn't to judge yourself or rush a decision. No. If you are actively in a trauma bond, or if today's episode resonated and kind of helped you realize that you might be in a trauma bond, please recognize that, again, the goal of today's episode is not to judge ourselves or to rush a decision or to make us feel like we need to hurry up and leave this relationship or act now. No. No. The goal is to see clearly enough that we stop calling it something that it's not. Because when we have clarity, clarity helps us change how we move. If any of this resonated for you today, folks, go ahead and take a moment to reflect on what stood out to you. And if you're ready to start breaking those patterns and building something more stable, stick around, because that's the work that we do here. I'll see you in the next episode, folks. As always, mahalo and aloha.